It started with a car. A simple, unassuming black luxury vehicle parked under the gray winter sky of London, its engine ticking softly, smoke curling faintly into the cold air. But this wasn't just any car. No, this was the vehicle carrying one of the most infamous members of the British royal family, Prince Harry, back to the United Kingdom after years of exile, media storms, and public controversies. The moment it rolled to a stop outside the palace gates, a storm was waiting to be unleashed, one that would shake the royal household to its core. And the question on everyone's mind was simple, yet electrifying. What exactly was inside the trunk of that car? Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. As the palace staff stood silently, their faces masks of calm, every footstep and rustle felt like an earthquake. The king himself, Charles, approached, his expression unreadable yet laden with history, with a lifetime of careful calculation, royal protocol, and unspoken tension. When he reached the car, he paused. His hand hovered over the latch, and the world, figuratively, seemed to hold its breath. In that quiet moment, millions of eyes, through cameras, phones, and tabloid speculation, were all asking the same question. Would this be reconciliation, humiliation, or something far more unexpected? But before the trunk even opened, before a single revelation could escape, another figure moved with lightning precision. Prince William, the heir apparent, whose calm public demeanor masked a simmering storm, was already noticing something. Something he could not have anticipated. Something that, when revealed, would push him into a rare, almost unthinkable reaction. And what William did next? Well, it would shock the world, spark rumors, and ignite controversy that even the tabloids had not dared predict. Imagine for a moment the tension. Picture yourself standing in the cold air, watching your estranged sibling approach after years of separation. Imagine knowing that every single eye in the palace, and beyond, is on you. What would you do? How would you react? And more importantly, what if the very thing your brother brought with him, hidden in a car trunk, could undermine every ounce of control you believed you had over your family, your reputation, and your legacy? The air was thick with anticipation. The palace gates had closed behind Harry's motorcade, cutting off the outside world. Inside, a few loyal staff members whispered nervously, glancing at the king, then William, then Harry, their expressions betraying the anxiety that polite faces could not conceal. What was in that trunk? Was it gifts? Old family letters? Or something far more audacious? The rumors were already spreading, barely whispered. Netflix equipment, production devices, possibly even recordings. And if the rumors were true, what did that imply? Was Harry attempting to document the family drama? Was he setting the stage for yet another public spectacle that would shake the monarchy and the public's perception of them? The moment stretched. Seconds felt like hours. And then, King Charles moved. His hand gripped the latch. There was a subtle shift in his posture, a slight tightening of his jaw, a brief flicker in his eyes, a signal, perhaps, of the judgment, authority, and unspoken curiosity mingling in his mind. And then he lifted the trunk. At first, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. But then, like a scene from a drama that could have been written by Hollywood, the contents came into view. For William, the sight was more than shocking. It was unthinkable. Netflix equipment, neatly packed and labeled, staring him back in the cold, clinical light of the palace driveway. Cameras, microphones, tripods, every tool of modern media production, right there in the family space he had always believed was sacred. How could his younger brother do this? What did it mean? And why now? The tension escalated instantly. Guards, who had been standing at a discreet distance, stiffened. Their hands twitched toward communication devices. William's face went pale, and for a moment, there was a silence so profound it felt as if the entire palace had stopped breathing. Every memory of past disagreements, betrayals, and public statements cascaded through the room. And then William made the call, literally. A swift, sharp command to the guards. Harry needed to be removed, at least temporarily, from the palace grounds. The reaction was almost reflexive, yet charged with emotion that even years of royal protocol could not suppress. But before we can fully understand what unfolded next, we need to step back and understand the stakes of this reunion. This wasn't merely a trip back to London. This was the culmination of years of estrangement, public criticism, and personal resentment. Harry had left the royal family under a storm of media scrutiny. His interviews, his memoirs, his documentaries, all of them had chipped away at the facade of unity the monarchy had spent decades constructing. And yet, he returned. For reconciliation? For damage control? Or perhaps for a plan only he understood, one hidden beneath layers of strategy, secrecy, and audacity? The public, of course, was already forming opinions. Social media feeds lit up with speculation. Headlines screamed about the royal confrontation, and everyone was eager for the first leaked photo, the first hint of drama. But inside the palace, it was far more complex. Protocol demanded calm, but human emotions, frustration, fear, pride, and the raw desire to assert control clashed with centuries of etiquette. The staff could feel it. The guards could sense it. And King Charles, ever the master of diplomacy, was now facing a moment that tested not only his authority, but also his capacity to mediate between two very different sons. And then, as Harry stepped closer to the palace entrance, the drama intensified. His face carried a mix of defiance and anticipation. He knew the contents of his trunk could provoke a reaction, but did he expect the magnitude of William's response? Did he anticipate the guards being called? Or was this, perhaps, all part of a calculated plan, a maneuver designed to elicit exactly this kind of chaos, to highlight the tensions, to place the spotlight once again on the fractures within the royal family? Every eye in the driveway, every hidden camera lens, every palace staff member was capturing history in real time. And the question everyone was asking, though no one would say it out loud yet, was, would this confrontation end in reconciliation, humiliation, or outright royal scandal? Could a single act, opening a trunk, shift the balance of power, reputation, and family loyalty in one calculated moment? And more importantly, what would the world see when the events that had been carefully orchestrated behind closed doors were finally revealed to the public? There was an almost cinematic quality to the moment. Snow or rain, or perhaps just the gray chill of London, hung in the air, accentuating the tension. The cars, the guards, the steps of the palace. They all seemed to pause, as if the building itself were holding its breath. And in that charged silence, every heartbeat, every subtle movement, carried weight far beyond its size. As viewers, we are left with a question that cuts to the very core of human curiosity. What happens when privilege, secrecy, and family collide in a single, explosive moment? How do you navigate emotions when centuries of tradition clash with modern media scrutiny? And what do you do when the very object that seems mundane, the trunk of a car, becomes the stage for revelation, shock, and perhaps betrayal? The airport was chaos, but not the kind you might expect. There were no crowds, no mobs, just the meticulous choreography of protocol. Black SUVs, security teams, and discreetly positioned press were ready to capture the moment. And there, in the midst of it all, stepped Prince Harry, the Duke of Sussex, the royal who had left the monarchy in flames of controversy, the man whose every decision since 2018 had been scrutinized, dissected, and debated across the globe. He looked smaller than the headlines made him appear, a bit more worn, a little more cautious. Yet, beneath that calm exterior, there was a storm, a plan, a purpose, a determination that had been simmering for years. As his steps carried him across the tarmac toward his waiting car, flashes from cameras illuminated his path like lightning in a darkened sky. And the questions were already swirling. Why now? Why return after years of distance? And most importantly, what did he intend to accomplish in the heart of the family he had left so publicly? The press had anticipated the scene. Social media accounts exploded with speculation. Harry returns for reconciliation? Will William greet him? Is this a setup for another explosive interview? But none of them had a clue, because Harry was carrying more than luggage, more than personal belongings. He was carrying the tension, the weight of public perception, and, most importantly, the contents of a trunk that could alter everything. As the black luxury vehicle approached the palace gates, the guards stiffened. Their training kicked in automatically, yet beneath the surface, they sensed the extraordinary. This was not a routine visit. This was not just a prince arriving home. This was a high-stakes encounter, one that would test loyalty, patience, and perhaps even the rules of the monarchy itself. And every step Harry took toward the car was a step closer to confrontation, a step closer to the moment that would define his return. Inside the car, the atmosphere was tense. Harry's face was calm, almost unreadable, but his eyes betrayed a hint of anticipation, maybe even a spark of mischief. There was a plan in motion, a sequence of events he had orchestrated carefully. For years, he had watched the family, observed the dynamics, and now he knew exactly what would provoke the reaction he wanted. And that reaction, he hoped, would finally force clarity. Reconciliation? Exposure? Something more daring? Only the palace itself would reveal the answer. Meanwhile, outside, King Charles waited, his posture precise, his expression composed. But every leader has a moment of vulnerability, and this was his. Years of fatherhood, diplomacy, and public scrutiny had honed him into the man who could mask almost anything, but he could not mask curiosity. And there, standing at the gates, was his son, the younger of the two, returning after years of tension and estrangement. What was he carrying? What was he thinking? And how would the monarchy survive the revelation of what lay in that trunk? The motorcade slowed, rolling through the massive gates like a ship cutting through calm waters, each second stretching longer than the last. William, already inside the palace, had been alerted to Harry's arrival. The news was discreet, transmitted through channels designed to prevent leaks, yet it carried a tone that set every nerve on edge. Harry is here. And the contents of his trunk? You won't believe it. William's reaction was immediate and visceral. There was a tension in the air, the kind that makes even seasoned guards uneasy. The crown prince, who had spent his life navigating royal protocol with precision, now faced a scenario that had no precedent. He had seen interviews, read memoirs, observed media leaks, and yet nothing prepared him for what Harry had brought back. His instincts screamed caution, but pride and territorial protectiveness propelled him forward. As the car rolled closer to the palace, staff members began to exchange subtle glances, whispers floating just beneath the surface. One butler murmured, almost too quietly for anyone to hear, "This isn't going to end quietly." The statement hung in the air like a specter, an omen of what was to come. Even the cameras, positioned for dramatic effect, seemed to sense the tension, capturing every reflective surface, every subtle flicker of emotion. Harry stepped out of the car with controlled calm. His steps were measured, deliberate, almost ceremonial. The world was watching, but in this moment, he carried a private storm, one that only he fully understood. The contents of the trunk, the Netflix equipment, the production devices, the cameras, the microphones, were more than mere tools. They were symbols, provocations, statements. They represented autonomy, defiance, and a willingness to challenge expectations in a way that only Harry could. And as he approached the palace, the tension reached a breaking point. Guards positioned themselves strategically, sensing the significance of every moment. King Charles took a subtle step forward, lifting a hand in a gesture that was both casual and commanding. And then, just as Harry reached the car, the trunk was opened. For a brief moment, the world seemed to freeze. The contents were revealed, not gifts, not memorabilia, not letters or apologies, but professional-grade Netflix equipment. Cameras, lighting rigs, sound devices, all meticulously arranged. For William, the scene was almost surreal. A mix of disbelief, incredulity, and silent outrage washed over him. How could his younger brother bring this into the sanctity of the palace grounds? What audacity, what calculated planning, what underlying message was embedded in this bold, almost theatrical gesture? And William acted. His reaction was swift, instinctual, and decisive. Guards were called. Orders barked. Security protocols activated. Harry, for all his careful planning, may have anticipated curiosity, shock, maybe even anger, but did he anticipate this level of immediate response? The tension was tangible, electric, almost unbearable. The palace, for centuries a bastion of tradition and decorum, was suddenly a theater of uncertainty, with family loyalty, personal pride, and public perception all hanging by a thread. And yet, even in this maelstrom, Harry's expression remained calm. There was a hint of triumph, perhaps satisfaction. He had anticipated a reaction, and the reaction had arrived, fully realized, charged with drama, emotion, and unexpected consequences. Every step, every glance, every unspoken word now carried weight, and the world was watching, from every corner of the globe, eager to witness the next move in this unfolding drama. The arrival was complete, but the confrontation had just begun. The palace, the family, the guards, and the world were all poised on a knife edge, and one question loomed larger than all others. What would happen next? How would William handle the audacity of Harry's gesture? Could King Charles mediate before the situation spiraled further? And perhaps most importantly, what was Harry truly aiming to achieve with this explosive, symbolic act? The air was colder now, sharper, as if London itself sensed the tension hanging over the palace gates. The crowd outside was minimal, most were kept at a distance, but inside, the atmosphere was electric. Cameras and lenses, positioned with military precision, captured every subtle movement, every flicker of emotion. And at the center of it all stood King Charles. His hand rested on the latch of the car's trunk. For a moment, he hesitated, not because he feared what lay beneath the lid, but because he understood the significance of this moment more acutely than anyone else in the driveway. For years, the palace had weathered storms of scandal. Interviews, memoirs, public spats. The royal family had endured it all. But this was unprecedented. The younger son, the prodigal prince, had returned carrying a trunk of professional-grade Netflix equipment. Cameras, microphones, lighting kits, tripods, tools that symbolized more than filmmaking. They symbolized intrusion, exposure, and a silent challenge to the royal authority. Charles exhaled slowly. The world was watching, even if no one outside realized the gravity of the moment. He gripped the handle and lifted the lid. Time seemed to slow. The polished metal of the equipment reflected the dim palace lights. It gleamed, cold and clinical, and yet imbued with the drama of human emotion. For William, who had just glimpsed the contents, the sight was more than shocking. It was almost sacrilegious. How could Harry bring such audacity into the heart of the family home? Was it reconciliation? Or was it provocation? The answer wasn't immediately clear, and perhaps that was the point. The younger prince had always been unpredictable, strategic in his timing, and careful in his theatrics. And here, in the driveway of Buckingham Palace, he had engineered a moment that left everyone on edge. William's reaction was instant. His jaw tightened. His eyes narrowed. The calm, measured demeanor he cultivated for public appearances was replaced by raw emotion. Disbelief, frustration, a touch of anger. How could the sanctity of the palace, the private space of the monarchy, be treated as a stage for a media spectacle? Guards sensed the tension immediately. Their fingers hovered over communication devices. Orders were exchanged in subtle, coded phrases. Every palace staff member could feel the ripple effect, a wave of energy that pulsed through the walls. And yet, in the middle of it all, Harry remained calm. His expression betrayed neither guilt nor fear. There was a faint smile, subtle and knowing, as if he anticipated the reaction he had now provoked. He had orchestrated this moment meticulously. Every camera, every lens, every whisper of curiosity had been anticipated. He was the eye of the storm, and the storm had arrived, fully realized, in the form of his own brother's stunned reaction. King Charles, ever the diplomat, stepped closer. He studied the equipment, then the faces of his sons. The balance of authority and parental concern was delicate. One wrong word, one misstep, could transform this moment from dramatic tension to outright conflict. And yet, there was also curiosity. The king had spent decades mediating conflicts, balancing egos, and maintaining the facade of unity. But what lay before him now was different. This was raw, unfiltered, and almost theatrical in its audacity. The palace staff, trained to maintain composure, could not entirely hide their reactions. Some exchanged glances, wide-eyed and anxious. Others shifted uncomfortably, sensing that history was unfolding in real time. A butler whispered to another, "I've never seen anything like this." The subtle humor in the observation did little to temper the tension. Everyone knew that the next moments could redefine relationships, reputations, and perhaps even the monarchy itself. William stepped forward, his voice sharp but controlled. "What is all of this?" His words cut through the quiet hum of anticipation. The question was simple, but the emotion behind it was complex. Outrage, disbelief, a sense of betrayal. To him, this was more than equipment. It was a challenge, a statement, a declaration that Harry was willing to bend rules and provoke reactions in ways that William had long thought impossible. Harry's response was measured, deliberate. He didn't explain. He didn't apologize. He allowed the silence to speak for him. And silence, in this case, was louder than any words could be. It amplified the tension, stretched the anticipation, and made the eventual confrontation unavoidable. The younger prince understood something crucial. In drama, timing is everything. He had calculated the exact moment, the exact revelation, and the exact emotional impact of this trunk's contents. And it was working. The guards, previously relaxed in their professional detachment, now stiffened. Orders were given. Protocols were activated. They moved with precision, positioning themselves strategically to contain any potential escalation. And then it happened. William's expression changed. Shock turned to disbelief, disbelief to anger. He stepped closer, almost instinctively, as if proximity could assert control. His gaze swept over the Netflix equipment, the tools of modern media production, and landed back on Harry. "Do you have any idea what you're doing?" he asked, his voice a mix of incredulity and accusation. The words were calm, but the undercurrent of tension was palpable. Harry simply nodded, almost imperceptibly. His eyes hinted at satisfaction, or perhaps defiance. There was no denial, no attempt to placate. He was a man confident in his strategy, unshaken by the immediate reaction. And that confidence, that audacity, only amplified William's response. The king, sensing the escalation, moved subtly between them. His presence was authoritative but neutral, a buffer between two forces that could easily erupt into conflict. His voice, calm and deliberate, sought to anchor the situation. "Let's take a moment," he said. But even as he spoke, the tension was undeniable. This was no ordinary family dispute. This was a collision of pride, strategy, and modern media against centuries of tradition. And in the background, the palace staff and guards braced themselves. Cameras captured every angle, every reaction, every subtle gesture. The world, even in real time, could not look away. And as the seconds stretched into what felt like minutes, a single, unspoken question hung in the air. What would William do next? Would he confront his brother physically, verbally, or would he retreat into the protocols that had guided him his entire life? And that's when William made a move that would change everything. He reached for his communication device, signaling the guards to take action. The command was subtle but deliberate. Remove Harry from the immediate area. The order, though measured, was explosive in implication. It was a declaration that boundaries had been crossed, that the younger prince's audacity had provoked a reaction strong enough to challenge the very hierarchy of the palace. And yet, even as the guards moved, even as the tension escalated, Harry remained unflinching. He had anticipated this. He had planned for this. Every step, every reaction, every calculated pause was part of a strategy that few, even within the royal household, could fully understand. The balance of power, the emotional stakes, the public attention, all of it had been factored into this single, audacious move. For a moment, the world seemed to stand still. The king, the princes, the guards, the palace staff, all frozen in a tableau of anticipation. And the question on everyone's mind, unspoken but undeniable, was this: what happens when pride, audacity, and family collide in a single, explosive moment? When the son who left the family returns with not gifts or apologies, but tools of exposure, of documentation, of challenge. And just when it seemed the tension could not escalate further, a subtle shift occurred. Harry reached into the trunk. The action was almost casual, but it carried weight. What he pulled out, hidden among the neatly packed equipment, would change everything. And no one in the driveway, not even the king, was prepared for it. The moment William's eyes landed on the contents of the trunk, a silent jolt ran through him. He had expected gifts, perhaps personal belongings, something meaningful, maybe even sentimental. But what lay before him was neither ordinary nor benign. Professional-grade Netflix equipment, neatly packed, shining under the dim palace lights. Cameras, microphones, tripods, lighting rigs, tools for production and documentation. The scale of it was staggering. The audacity was undeniable. And the implication, it cut deeper than anything he had imagined. How could Harry, his own brother, bring the machinery of media into the sacred confines of the palace? William's mind raced. Was this reconciliation, or was this a provocation dressed as a gesture? Was Harry attempting to record, to document, or even to expose secrets that were never meant for public consumption? The very presence of the equipment was a challenge, a subtle declaration that boundaries were no longer respected, that the rules William had relied on his entire life no longer applied. The air was thick with tension, guards stiffened, senses alert, weapons and radios momentarily forgotten in the gravity of the moment. King Charles, standing between the two sons, raised an eyebrow but remained calm. His experience as a monarch allowing him to mask immediate judgment, yet even he could not ignore the shock radiating from William. William's disbelief transformed into a rising anger. His voice, sharp and controlled, broke the silence. "Harry, what is all of this? Do you realize what you're doing?" The words were calm but charged with authority. Every syllable carried weight, the kind that only comes from deep-seated frustration mixed with familial betrayal. Harry's response was minimal. A faint, almost imperceptible nod. No words, no justification, just the quiet confidence of a man who had anticipated this exact reaction. There was a strategy at play, a deliberate pacing that heightened the drama, turning even silence into a weapon. William's frustration boiled, yet Harry's calmness only intensified the tension. For a moment, the king interjected. "Let's remain composed," he said, voice measured, attempting to mediate before the situation escalated further. But his words barely registered. William's reaction had already surpassed protocol. He was witnessing something that destabilized the very foundation of his understanding. The younger prince, who had long been perceived as impulsive but harmless, was now orchestrating a confrontation on his own terms. The Netflix equipment was more than just tools. It was a symbol. Cameras represented exposure. Microphones, the potential for words to be recorded and broadcast. Tripods and lighting. Professional staging for documentation, preparation for broadcast, even dramatization. The message was subtle yet unmistakable. Harry was no longer a passive member of the family. He was an active, autonomous force, capable of challenging and reframing every narrative. William's pulse quickened. He was aware of the stakes, aware that any public display of anger could be leveraged into media fodder. Yet inside, his composure wavered. Every glance at the neatly organized equipment felt like a reminder of past grievances, public spats, and the countless headlines that had portrayed him in the shadow of his younger brother's audacious moves. He had anticipated some level of provocation, but this, the scale, the precision, the implied defiance, was unprecedented. And then a question formed in his mind, piercing and unavoidable. What was Harry planning to do with all this? Was it merely symbolic, a statement of presence and power? Or was there a deeper, more calculated intention? Could this equipment, hidden in the trunk of a car, be the key to exposing secrets, shifting narratives, or even undermining the family from within? The uncertainty was maddening. It created a tension that no protocol, no training, and no preparation could fully mitigate. Harry, for his part, seemed almost at ease. The faint curve of his lips suggested satisfaction, perhaps even anticipation. He had always understood the optics of media and family in a way William had not. Where William saw propriety, Harry saw opportunity. Where William saw threat, Harry saw narrative control. And now, in the driveway of Buckingham Palace, the stakes were at their peak. Guards exchanged subtle glances. Their training told them to intervene if necessary, but the situation required restraint. Physical action could escalate the drama beyond repair. Every microsecond of hesitation mattered. The balance between protocol and personal reaction was delicate, and the wrong move could have irreversible consequences. And then William did the unthinkable. He reached for his communication device. A signal, a command. The guards stiffened, ready to move, acting on instinct and authority. It was a decisive moment, a demonstration of control, but also a recognition that the confrontation had escalated beyond simple words. This was not a routine family disagreement. This was a challenge to authority, to tradition, and to William's understanding of his role within the family. For Harry, the reaction was expected but still satisfying. He had predicted every pause, every glance, every instinctive response. The chaos, the anticipation, the subtle panic, it all played into his carefully crafted scenario. He had returned to the UK with more than a desire for reconciliation. He had returned with leverage, narrative control, and the potential to shift power in ways that could redefine family dynamics forever. William, caught between duty and emotion, took a step closer to the trunk. His gaze swept across the array of equipment, then rested on Harry. The unspoken question hung in the air. Why? Why bring this now, in this way, in front of cameras, staff, and the king? What message was Harry trying to send? Was it apology, provocation, or something far more audacious? The king intervened again, voice calm but firm. Let's discuss this inside. There's no need for escalation here. But William's tension did not ease. The sight of the equipment, the audacity of the act, and the presence of his younger brother all combined into a storm that no simple mediation could immediately quell. And then the subtle but critical detail emerged. Hidden within the neatly packed Netflix equipment was a single, unmarked device. A small black box, inconspicuous but clearly placed with intention. Its presence shifted the stakes once more. For William, the implications were immediate and alarming. This was no longer just a media statement. This was a calculated, strategic move that required an immediate response. The guards tightened their formation, ready for the next order. Every person in the driveway felt it. The atmosphere was charged. History was being made, but the outcome was uncertain. The palace, the family, the monarchy itself, all were poised on the edge of revelation, drama, and potential scandal. And the question, now undeniable, lingered in everyone's mind. How far was Harry willing to take this? How would William respond? Could the king mediate before the situation spiraled entirely out of control? And then it happened. William, eyes wide and jaw set, delivered a command that would alter the trajectory of the evening. Guards moved quickly, positioning themselves to enforce his instructions. Harry, poised, calculated, and unflinching, met their movement with subtle amusement. The tension was palpable, a living thing that seemed to vibrate through the driveway, the palace, and the very air itself. The palace driveway had never felt so tense. Every step, every glance, every breath carried weight as if time itself had slowed. Guards moved with precision, yet there was a subtle rigidity, a tension beneath the surface that no training could fully erase. The order had come from William himself, crisp and decisive. Remove Harry from the immediate area. The command was executed, but the stakes were higher than anyone could anticipate. Harry, standing beside his trunk of meticulously packed Netflix equipment, did not flinch. He watched the guards position themselves with a faint, almost imperceptible smirk. Every instinct, every calculated move had been anticipated. He had returned not only to see his family, but to provoke, to challenge, and perhaps even to assert control in a place where tradition and authority had always dominated. The guards formed a perimeter, their eyes scanning the surroundings, trained to detect threats both visible and invisible. Yet, in this instance, the threat was neither physical nor immediate. It was emotional, psychological, and profoundly strategic. Harry's presence alone, coupled with the audacious display of media equipment, created a tension that reverberated through every stone of the palace. The security personnel felt it. The staff felt it. And, most importantly, William felt it. William's expression was taut, a blend of authority, frustration, and disbelief. He understood protocol, understood hierarchy, understood optics, but he was also human. And seeing his younger brother stand defiantly, unshaken by commands or expectations, sent a jolt through him that few had ever witnessed. The calm, controlled image he presented to the public was now challenged by raw, unpredictable emotion. The king, standing between the two sons, attempted to stabilize the scene. "Let's remain calm," Charles said, voice measured yet firm. "There is no need for escalation here." But words were fragile shields against the storm of tension that had already taken hold. The driveway, the staff, the guards, all seemed suspended in a moment of uncertainty, each heartbeat magnified, each movement a potential spark. Harry's calmness was both infuriating and deliberate. He understood the psychological game at play. Every step William took, every subtle tightening of the jaw, every whispered instruction to the guards, it all played into his hands. The audacity of bringing the Netflix equipment was amplified by his ability to remain unshaken, almost serene, amidst the brewing storm. And then came the subtle shift that altered the dynamic entirely. One of the guards, a seasoned officer with decades of experience, noticed a detail that others had missed. Among the equipment in the trunk was a small, unmarked black device. Its presence was inconspicuous but deliberate, hinting at plans and intentions beyond mere filming. William's eyes locked onto it instantly. This was no longer a question of provocation or rebellion. It was a calculated move with deeper implications, a signal that Harry had planned more than just a dramatic entrance. William stepped forward, signaling the guards to tighten the perimeter. Every motion was deliberate, a display of control, yet the underlying anxiety was palpable. He was aware of the optics. Any overreaction could be exploited, but inaction could invite chaos. Every second stretched longer as the balance between authority, emotion, and familial loyalty teetered dangerously. Harry, observing silently, allowed the tension to simmer. He understood the power of anticipation. The guard's stiffened posture, William's rising agitation, and Charles's measured intervention all contributed to a carefully orchestrated drama. And the subtle, almost imperceptible smile that played across Harry's lips suggested he was savoring the moment. Directly addressing the audience, one might ask, what would you do if you were in William's position? Your brother returns after years of estrangement, bringing with him tools of media exposure, standing calm and defiant while your every instinct screams to react. Do you assert authority? Do you attempt diplomacy? Or do you hesitate, caught between protocol and emotion? The palace staff could barely contain themselves. Whispers flitted through the hallway windows, maids exchanged glances of disbelief, and butlers shifted nervously. For centuries, they had witnessed royal dramas, subtle power plays, and private family tensions, but nothing on this scale. The combination of audacity, technology, and the immediacy of emotion created a charged atmosphere that was almost tangible. And then William acted again. He called the head guard forward, issuing specific, urgent instructions. Harry was to be moved, isolated if necessary, until the situation could be assessed. The command was executed with precision. Guards approached with a measured confidence, forming a corridor to escort Harry away from the main driveway and toward a more controlled area of the palace. But Harry did not comply immediately. He stepped back, subtly repositioning himself, ensuring that the cameras caught every calculated gesture. His eyes met William's, steady and unwavering, a silent challenge radiating through the tense air. It was a battle of wills, of strategy, of pride. And in that silent exchange, the stakes became clear. This confrontation was about more than presence. It was about control, narrative, and legacy. King Charles intervened again, attempting to de-escalate the situation. "Harry, let's discuss this inside," he said, his tone carrying the weight of authority and experience. There is no need for immediate confrontation in the driveway. Yet the presence of the Netflix equipment, the subtle threat implied by the unmarked device, and William's escalating tension created a scenario that was far from ordinary. The guards, for their part, were walking a fine line. They were trained for security threats, for physical danger, but this was something different. The threat was not violence. It was chaos, unpredictability, and the potential exposure of secrets that could reverberate far beyond the palace walls. Their movements were precise, disciplined, yet every nerve was alert, every sense heightened. As Harry allowed himself a brief, knowing glance at the assembled guards, one could almost see the psychological strategy unfold. He had anticipated their reactions, understood the chain of command, and had positioned himself to exploit the slightest hesitation or misstep. Every step he took was deliberate, a demonstration of autonomy, foresight, and a willingness to challenge expectations. And then the subtle but critical moment arrived. A single camera, mounted on one of the tripods from the trunk, had shifted slightly, an unintended consequence of the initial opening of the trunk. Its lens now captured the entire scene in perfect detail, feeding both the palace's internal monitoring systems and the potential for public exposure. This minor shift was enough to escalate the stakes even further. Now, every gesture, every glance, every word was potentially being recorded, analyzed, and scrutinized. The tension reached its peak. William's posture stiffened, his expression a mask of authority that barely contained rising frustration. Charles stood calmly, attempting to mediate, but even he could not fully mask his concern. Guards were alert, ready to act, every muscle taut. Harry remained calm, eyes steady, lips curved with subtle satisfaction. The balance of power, control, and perception had shifted. And just when it seemed the situation could not become more charged, a sound, soft, almost imperceptible, but unmistakable, cut through the driveway. A click, a faint hum, something mechanical. Every guard, every staff member, every prince turned instinctively toward it. The subtle sound came from within the trunk. Whatever had been hidden among the Netflix equipment, among the neatly arranged cameras and devices, was about to reveal itself. The world seemed to hold its breath. Every detail, every movement, every reaction was magnified, and the anticipation was unbearable. For a moment, it was not just a family dispute. It was a moment of high-stakes theater, one that could redefine relationships, reputations, and perhaps the monarchy itself. The confrontation begins. This chapter will be at least 2,000 words, following your rules. Dramatic expose style, emotional spikes, storytelling with tension, short punchy lines mixed with longer descriptive beats, direct audience engagement, and ending on a cliffhanger. The palace driveway had transformed into an arena. Not an arena of swords or violence, but of wills, egos, and unspoken history. William's gaze locked onto Harry. Every muscle in his body was taut with authority, frustration, and disbelief. The calm demeanor the public had always seen was gone, replaced with raw, unfiltered emotion. Every instinct screamed control, yet every move Harry made challenged that authority. The confrontation had begun. Harry, standing beside the trunk filled with Netflix equipment, remained unervingly calm. His posture was deliberate, almost theatrical. Every glance, every subtle smirk, seemed designed to provoke a response. And provoke he did. William's eyes narrowed. Every second of hesitation felt like a defeat. Every unspoken accusation hung in the cold London air. For the first time in years, the two brothers faced each other not as public figures, but as siblings, carrying decades of resentment, misunderstandings, and public judgment into a single charged moment. The king, ever the diplomat, stepped between them, attempting to mediate. "Let's remain calm," he said, his voice measured, authoritative, yet carrying a hint of concern. "We can discuss this inside, away from prying eyes." But his words barely registered. William's frustration, compounded by the audacity of Harry's arrival and the sight of the media equipment, overpowered diplomacy. And Harry's calm defiance was a catalyst, igniting the tension that had been simmering for years. The unmarked black device in the trunk drew William's immediate attention. Its subtle presence hinted at strategy and planning beyond mere dramatics. Every guard, every staff member, and every observer instinctively recognized that the situation had escalated far beyond a simple family reunion. This was a confrontation that could redefine power, loyalty, and perception within the royal household. William stepped forward, his voice sharp and controlled. "Harry, enough games. What exactly is your intention with all of this?" His words were precise, meant to assert authority, yet beneath them lay the raw emotion of betrayal, frustration, and confusion. Every second that passed, every subtle movement from Harry, threatened to unravel the careful structure William had maintained over the years. Harry's response was measured but pointed. A faint nod, a subtle glance toward the equipment, and silence. He let the unspoken implications do the work. The calmness of his demeanor contrasted sharply with William's rising agitation, heightening the psychological tension of the moment. For the staff and guards, the situation was unprecedented. They were trained for security, protocol, and crisis management. But this confrontation required more than skill. It required intuition, patience, and the ability to anticipate human behavior under extreme emotional strain. Every subtle twitch, every flicker of expression, every step taken by the princes carried meaning. Directly to the audience, imagine standing in that driveway. Two heirs of a centuries-old monarchy, tension crackling in the air, every move recorded, every glance scrutinized. The stakes are unimaginable, not just for them, but for everyone watching. What would you do if you were William? If you were Harry? How far would you go to assert authority, defend legacy, or stake a claim to your narrative? The subtle hum from the black device caught everyone's attention. A low, mechanical sound that suggested readiness, activation, or some unknown function. Guards instinctively tightened their formation, eyes darting between the princes and the trunk. Every staff member sensed that the next moment could escalate beyond verbal confrontation. William's frustration boiled. He gestured sharply, signaling guards to move closer. His authority demanded action. Harry, however, did not retreat. Instead, he subtly repositioned himself, ensuring that the equipment, the trunk, and his presence remained in perfect view. The psychological battle was in full swing. Control was being asserted, challenged, and redefined with every heartbeat. The king intervened once more, trying to restore order. Harry, step aside. William, calm yourself. We must maintain decorum. But the words barely registered. The driveway had become a theater of tension, and the audience, both live and virtual, could feel the intensity. Cameras captured every detail, the subtle shifts in posture, the tightening of jaws, the silent stares that spoke volumes. Harry finally spoke, his voice calm, deliberate, and confident. I didn't come here to start a fight. I came to return, to reconcile, but also to be seen for who I am and what I stand for. The statement was both defiant and conciliatory, a paradox designed to provoke thought, emotion, and, inevitably, reaction. William's eyes narrowed further. Was this humility, manipulation, or a calculated move to assert control over the narrative? The unmarked device clicked again, subtle but audible, drawing attention. William's suspicion intensified. He gestured sharply at Harry. Step back. Now. The command was direct, unyielding, but Harry's defiance remained poised and measured. He had anticipated this exact moment, knowing that any assertive move from William would heighten tension and capture maximum attention. At this point, the guards were on edge. Their training emphasized caution, observation, and readiness, but the emotional stakes had surpassed protocol. They were no longer merely executing orders. They were navigating a high-stakes psychological drama, one with unknown consequences. Every microsecond mattered. The palace staff watched silently, aware that the unfolding confrontation could set precedent, shape media narratives, and redefine family dynamics. A butler muttered under his breath, "This isn't just a reunion, it's a declaration." Others nodded subtly, sharing an unspoken acknowledgement of the drama's magnitude. The tension in the driveway became almost unbearable. William's frustration, Harry's calm defiance, the king's attempts at mediation, and the ominous hum of the device combined into a moment that seemed suspended in time. Every observer could sense that the confrontation was about to escalate beyond words, beyond protocol, and perhaps even beyond reconciliation. And then, just when it seemed the standoff might continue indefinitely, Harry reached into the trunk. His hand hovered over the Netflix equipment, then grasped the black device. Every eye, every camera lens, every staff member, and every guard was fixed on him. The silence that followed was deafening. Harry's lips curved into a subtle, knowing smile. He lifted the device slightly, just enough to be seen. William's eyes widened, disbelief giving way to incredulity and anger. The implications were immediate. This was more than media equipment. This was a tool, a signal, and potentially a revelation. The confrontation had entered a new phase, one that could redefine not just the moment, but the legacy of the entire family. Directly to the audience. What would you do if you were William? If the object in your brother's hand had the potential to expose, provoke, or redefine everything you believed about family, loyalty, and control? Every second counted. Every reaction had consequences. And the next move, Harry's, William's, or even the King's, would be pivotal. The driveway was electric. Guards tensed, ready to intervene. Staff held their breath. The King's calm composure masked deep concern. And Harry remained poised, confident, and unyielding. The confrontation had begun in earnest, and there was no turning back. Harry's bold move, the device revealed. This chapter will be at least 2,000 words, following your rules. Dramatic exposé style, emotional spikes, tension-building storytelling, short punchy lines mixed with longer descriptive beats, audience engagement, and ending on a cliffhanger. The driveway had become a stage of anticipation. Every observer, the guards, the palace staff, even the king, watched Harry with bated breath. In his hand, the small, unmarked black device gleamed under the palace lights. Its presence had transformed the confrontation from a tense standoff into a potentially explosive revelation. The air seemed heavier, charged with possibility, uncertainty, and the weight of history. William's eyes were fixed on the device, incredulity flashing in his expression. "What is that, Harry?" His voice was measured, attempting authority, but the tremor beneath revealed anxiety. The younger prince had always had a flair for the dramatic, but this was unprecedented. The device wasn't just a prop. It was deliberate, strategic, potentially destabilizing. Harry's calm gaze met his brother's. "You'll see soon enough," he said quietly, with an almost imperceptible smile. The words were nonchalant, yet packed with tension. Silence fell like a heavy curtain, broken only by the faint hum emanating from the device. Even the guards stiffened, sensing the unspoken power in that small black box. For a moment, the world seemed suspended in time. The equipment in the trunk, the device in Harry's hand, the palpable tension between the brothers. It was as if centuries of royal protocol and expectation had condensed into a single electric moment. Every staff member shifted uncomfortably, realizing that history was unfolding in front of their eyes. This was more than drama. It was a high-stakes negotiation of pride, authority, and legacy. Directly to the audience, imagine witnessing this scene. A royal standoff, decades of estrangement, and public scrutiny boiling over. And at the center, a device whose purpose is unknown. How would you react? What would you expect to happen next? And more importantly, what secrets could this device reveal? Harry's fingers hovered over the device. The subtle movement, deliberate and controlled, was a masterclass in psychological tension. He understood optics, strategy, and the power of anticipation. Every microsecond of hesitation amplified the suspense, forcing William to confront his own assumptions, emotions, and fears. William took a step closer, a mix of authority and apprehension. "Harry, put it down. Now." The command was firm, but the subtle panic in his eyes betrayed the stakes he recognized but could not fully control. For William, this wasn't just about family protocol or authority. This was about history, narrative, and the fragile balance of trust that had been shattered years ago. Harry's response was almost theatrical. With deliberate care, he activated the device. A soft click, a faint hum intensified. Lights on the device blinked once, twice, thrice. And then, a projection began to emerge, a holographic display that shimmered above the trunk. William and the guards blinked in disbelief. This was no ordinary piece of equipment. The device projected a 3D map of the palace driveway, the surrounding grounds, and even highlighted the positions of all guards and staff. It was precise, almost surgical in its detail. The implications were immediate. William's jaw tightened. The king's eyes narrowed. Guards instinctively repositioned themselves, tension rippling through the formation. Harry had brought not only media equipment, but a device capable of surveillance, planning, and potentially documenting every movement in the palace. The audacity, precision, and foresight were staggering. The display shifted, focusing on the trunk itself. Each piece of Netflix equipment was mapped, labeled, and annotated with technical precision. Cameras, microphones, lighting rigs, all meticulously accounted for. It was a visual declaration of readiness, planning, and transparency. Harry wasn't just here to provoke. He was here to assert a narrative, to showcase preparedness, and perhaps even to hint at control over his own story. William's voice trembled slightly, betraying a mix of anger and disbelief. This is insane. Who approved this? What are you planning? Every word was sharp, deliberate, but beneath it lay a mixture of fear and awe. He understood the audacity of the move. He understood that Harry had transformed a simple visit into a high-stakes psychological confrontation. The king stepped forward, placing a subtle hand on William's shoulder. "Patience," Charles murmured, voice calm yet heavy with concern. "Let's understand what this truly is before reacting." But understanding was difficult. The implications were vast. Not only was this a family confrontation, but it was now entwined with strategy, media, and technology in a way that no one had anticipated. Harry, sensing the shift in attention, leaned slightly forward. "This isn't meant to threaten anyone," he said, voice steady. "But it's meant to ensure clarity, transparency, and, perhaps, to make a point about how far I've come and how seriously I take my return." The words were calm, but the energy in the air was electric. The audience, guards, staff, and brothers alike, felt the tension spike, almost as if the very stones of the palace vibrated with anticipation. A guard whispered to another, barely audible, "I've never seen equipment like this used here, in this context." The second guard nodded, eyes wide, realizing that this was more than a display. It was a statement, a challenge, and a revelation wrapped in one audacious act. William, now visibly frustrated, gestured sharply to the guards. "Secure it. Remove it immediately." But even as the command was issued, the subtle smirk on Harry's face suggested he had anticipated resistance. He remained calm, poised, ready for the reaction, understanding that every move made him appear confident, controlled, and untouchable in the psychological theater unfolding. The device clicked again. A new layer of information appeared on the holographic display. Not just the driveway, not just equipment, but details of the palace interior, potential media angles, and even hypothetical positions of visitors. The scope of planning, precision, and foresight was breathtaking. It was a blueprint, a strategy, a visual assertion of narrative control. William's reaction intensified. He stepped forward, hand raised as if to seize the device, but Harry held his ground. Their eyes locked, a silent war of wills, pride, and unresolved history. The guards paused, unsure whether to intervene physically or wait for orders. The tension had become a tangible force, pressing down on everyone in the driveway, directly to the audience. What would you do if confronted with a device capable of mapping, documenting, and potentially controlling perception in real time? How would you assert authority, maintain composure, and protect legacy, all while your sibling calmly challenges your every assumption? And then, just as it seemed William might act decisively, Harry pressed a subtle button on the device. The projection shifted one last time, revealing a series of recordings. Snippets of interviews, behind-the-scenes footage, and private family moments, none of which were currently public, but all now displayed for the palace to witness. The audacity of it hit William like a physical blow. The confrontation had escalated from tension to revelation. The driveway was no longer a passive stage. It was a theater of power, pride, and high-stakes psychological strategy. Every staff member, guard, and royal felt the electric charge of what was happening. William's fury. Guards intervene. This chapter will be at least 2,000 words, following your rules. Dramatic exposé style, emotional spikes, storytelling with tension, short punchy lines mixed with longer descriptive beats, direct audience engagement, and ending on a cliffhanger. The moment the recordings appeared on the device, William's composure shattered. Every carefully maintained ounce of restraint, every professional veneer, crumbled beneath the weight of disbelief, anger, and betrayal. The driveway, once a mere stage for tense conversation, now transformed into a battlefield of wills. William's fists clenched at his sides. He was seeing, in real time, moments from his own family's life, behind-the-scenes footage, private interviews, interactions meant for no one's eyes but the family's, and all now displayed by Harry, deliberate and unyielding. The guards felt the shift immediately. Their professional detachment vanished, replaced with a heightened urgency. Protocols were no longer sufficient. This was no longer just a confrontation. It was a potential breach of security, privacy, and trust all rolled into one explosive moment. Orders were exchanged silently, guards repositioning with lightning speed, hands hovering near radios and defensive stances. The air crackled with anticipation, every heartbeat echoing with tension. William's voice rang out, sharp and commanding. "Harry, step away from that device. Now." His tone was a mixture of fury and disbelief. Every word reverberated through the driveway, carrying centuries of royal authority, family pride, and personal frustration. The younger prince, however, remained unflinching, calm, controlled. The faint smirk on his face told a story of careful calculation, a silent understanding that he had anticipated this very reaction and wanted every microsecond of it to unfold. The king stepped between them, attempting once more to assert calm. "William, we must handle this diplomatically. Harry, please, let us discuss this inside." But even Charles, with decades of experience mediating conflicts both political and personal, could not fully temper the tension. The confrontation had escalated beyond words. Every person present could feel it, a palpable pressure pressing on their chests, tightening with each second. The device continued to project images, a silent provocateur in the middle of the standoff. The recordings included snippets that no one outside the royal household should have seen, moments of vulnerability, private conversations, and interactions meant to remain unshared. The audacity of presenting these publicly, even just to family, was a declaration. Harry was not just returning. He was asserting his narrative, his perspective, and his autonomy in the most striking way imaginable. William's frustration boiled over. He gestured sharply at the guards. "Do it. Remove it. Take him away from that device immediately." The order was precise, decisive, yet loaded with personal emotion. This wasn't just a command. It was a statement of authority, a refusal to allow the younger prince to manipulate or dominate the narrative within the walls of the palace. The guards responded immediately. They formed a tight perimeter around Harry, moving with speed and precision, but even their disciplined approach was met with calm defiance. Harry didn't move. He didn't resist overtly, but his subtle shifts, slight movements, and steady gaze suggested he was ready for any attempt to intervene. Every step he took, every glance he made, seemed calculated to maximize tension and maintain control. Directly to the audience, imagine being in William's position. Your younger brother, who has long been unpredictable, stands before you with technology capable of exposing private moments, asserting control, and challenging your authority. What do? Do you assert force, appeal to protocol, or hesitate, weighed down by familial history and public expectation? Every decision carries consequences that extend far beyond this moment. William stepped closer, hands shaking slightly with barely suppressed anger. "Harry, this ends now," he said, voice rising. "You will not use this to manipulate us, or the public." But Harry remained composed, a faint smile hinting at the power of anticipation. He understood that every word, every gesture, every subtle reaction from William amplified the drama and gave him leverage. The king's voice intervened once again, calm but firm. "Enough. Let us handle this carefully. We cannot let this escalate further in the driveway." But the situation was already beyond mere mediation. The projections, the equipment, and Harry's deliberate calmness had shifted the power dynamic.